All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. So, the nightmare that was the 2025 Major League Baseball season is officially over for the New York Mets. The Mets came into play today needing to defeat the Miami Marlins while also needing the Cincinnati Reds to lose. Well, the Reds held up their end of the bargain, folks. They lost to the Milwaukee Brewers. But the Mets bugaboo that is the Marlins continues. Since 2007, this is now the third time that the Mets entered the final day of the regular season needing to win in order to get to the postseason, and the Marlins were their opponent. And each time, the Marlins came up short, or the Mets rather came up short against the Marlins. Tyler, what is going on, my man? You're saying let's go Redlegs. Listen, I'll tell you like this, and I actually talked about this a couple of weeks on this platform, or weeks ago on this platform. I said this was a great turnaround for the Cincinnati Reds. You think about it, just a couple of years ago, this team lost 100 games. That was after they had that unnecessary fire sale. And then in year number one, with a veteran manager in Terry Francona, a guy who won two World Series championships with the Boston Red Sox, also got the Cleveland Guardians one game away from winning it all. Now he's got Cincinnati into the postseason. You don't think this guy's not a Hall of Fame manager? The proof is in the pudding, man. But nonetheless, with the Mets, man, $340 million of Steve Cohen's money could not guarantee this team a berth in the postseason. And now that the offseason has begun for the Mets, the questions and the finger pointing are going to begin, as it's going to be a long winter in the borough of Queens in New York City. Now, yes, the Mets did spend a ton of money, but some of it was spent wrong. Honestly, and I questioned this all season long. And that's the beauty of sports. You cannot hide who you are. Okay? The Mets had a no frills approach to their starting pitching all season long. And for the bulk of the season, it came back to bite the Mets in the derriere. Honestly, all of that falls into the lap of Mets president of baseball operations, David Stearns, who does not believe in spending money on pitching. He continues to roll the dice on reclamation projects and trying to find a diamond in the rough, and it backfired on him in a big way this year. Only the Marlins and Colorado Rockies had fewer quality starts for the entire season in all of Major League Baseball than the Metropolitans did this year. And of course, when you have starting pitchers who are unable to consistently go deep into games, it's going to tax your bullpen. And of course, first half of the season, the Mets bullpen was on point, okay? But as the season progressed, the quality that the Mets were getting out of their bullpen began to fade. Why? Because you're asking so much out of those guys, and you don't have guys who can consistently go into the seventh and eighth inning. I mean, you look at it right now for the Mets season. Their leader in innings pitched was David Peterson with 168.2. Nobody on the Mets got to 200. Nobody on the Mets even got to 175. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of where this pitching staff was going. They only had two starters who made at least 30 starts for the season, Clay Holmes and David Peterson. And again, Clay Holmes was one of those reclamation projects where he's been a relief pitcher for all of his MLB career. Left the Yankees, went to the Mets. The Mets felt like they could make him a starter. And as the season progressed, you could see that Clay Holmes ran out of gas because he was asked to do more than he's accustomed to. Okay, Clay Holmes should have been a guy at the end of the rotation. And honestly, for the bulk, or if all of the Mets rotation for that matter, they had a whole bunch of fours and fives. There was no ace. There was no two guy. There was no three guy in this rotation and it showed. They brought back Sean Mania this year after Sean Mania gave them some quality starts last year in their postseason run. Sean Mania clearly showed that he was a guy who was pitching for a contract last year. David Peterson, you'd be hard pressed to convince anybody that David Peterson made the All Star team in July based on how he pitched coming down the stretch of the season for the New York Mets. You look at Kodai Senga. Kodai Senga has not been money well spent for the Mets. He's a guy, he cannot stay healthy. On top of that, if he has to elevate his pitches, it just turns into batting practice. So that's another issue with the Mets rotation right there. We could just go right down the list. The Frankie Montas signing was a disaster from the word go. And the Mets were so desperate for pitching coming down the stretch, they had to call up three rookies and Nolan McLean, Brendan Sprout, and Jonah Tong, all who should have been in the minors. Okay, so you look at the lineup. Yes, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, and Francisco Lindor combined for 112 home runs this season, but many of those were of the solo variety, and those guys included the entire lineup struggled all season long with men on base. And again, it showed up again in their loss to the Marlins. Why? Because with their season on the line, the Mets were just shut out. Okay, you go back to Friday night. They scored 2 runs early on. They were shut out for the rest of the game. Okay, you're saying the stat about record games they were losing in the eighth is insane. Listen, again, what you cannot do always shows up at the most inopportune time. The Mets were 0-70 this season when going into the ninth inning when they were trailing. That is embarrassing. There's no other way around it. That is simply embarrassing right there. They had no comeback juice in them whatsoever. The bottom of the Mets lineup, so inconsistent. They didn't hit. Mark Vientos looked like he was going to be that breakout player for the Mets after a strong 2024 campaign. Vientos in 121 games played for the Mets this season only hit 233, 17 home runs, and 16 runs batted in. And when he did start to get it going and it looked like he was about to turn that corner in the second half of the season, he fizzled. Okay. You look at this Mets team, and I've said this all season long, and I will bring it up again right now. Where was the leadership? There was no leadership on this team this year. You look at the losing streaks, and I'm using plural, the long losing streaks that they had, and somebody needed to step up and say, hey, you know what? It's not going down today, not on my watch. By come hell or high water, we're going to find a way to get in front of this thing. There was never that moment. There was never that guy on this team. And again, you look at the Mets. They failed to take advantage of so many opportunities this year. One of the biggest opportunities, in my opinion, that the Mets failed at, you look at all of the injuries that the Atlanta Braves had. And basically, because of that, it became a two-team race between the Mets and the Phillies in the NL East. Well, guess what? Philadelphia took care of their business. That's why they're in the postseason right now. And of course, the Mets, they're watching the postseason at home, or they're going to watch the postseason at home with the rest of them. And I know that there are reports that the Mets intend to bring Carlos Mendoza back as their manager. There's no way in hell that the New York Mets should bring Carlos Mendoza back as their manager in 2026. You look at this collapse. Through 69 games, the Mets were 45-24. They had a 7-game lead over the Philadelphia Phillies in the National League East. They had the best record in baseball. For the rest of the season, the Mets only won 38 games. Okay? And their record the rest of the way was among the worst in baseball. There's no way in the world that you can bring Carlos Mendoza back. And honestly, I'll tell you like this. If you bring Carlos Mendoza back The only thing that is going to happen for the Mets in 2026 is they're going to continue to build off of how they finish. You go back to 2007 when the Mets had that collapse coming down the stretch. All right, it was one of those where they brought Willie Randolph back for 2008, and all it was question after question after question about Willie Randolph until they ultimately had to let him go. You go back to the Boston Red Sox after their collapse for I think it was a 2009 or 2010 season. I think it was 2010. And right after that, they moved on from Terry Francona. As great as Terry Francona was for the Red Sox, you know what? They felt like they needed a new voice. You cannot bring Carlos Mendoza back as your manager in 2026 and talk about you're serious about winning. Carlos Mendoza, aside from the collapse, the same old song every single night when the Mets lost the game. Yeah, we got the talent. We have the talent. We have the talent. We got to find a way. I believe in my guys. And I'm just saying this because this is literally the same thing that he was saying each and every night. He mismanaged his pitching staff. He mismanaged his lineup. He was not a good X's and O's guy. So again, you cannot go out there and bring this guy back. And then on top of that, you're just opening him up as well as your entire organization to more criticism. Just think about it. Let's just say hypothetically, Carlos Mendoza returns as the manager of the Mets for 2026. Let's fast forward about 6 months when opening day turns around. And this opening day at Citi Field, usually time for optimism for baseball fans, okay? The team is introduced, starters, reserve players, coaches, manager. Can you imagine how that fan base is going to react in Queens if Carlos Mendoza is walking out there to be greeted, if you will, by the home fans of Citi Field? It's not going to be pretty. You have to move on from him. Okay, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You look at this thing. Like I said, back in June, this team had a 7-game lead over the Philadelphia Phillies for the top spot in the East. And now that the season is finished, they finished the season 13 games behind Philadelphia. That is a 20-game swing. Okay, where was the pride for the New York Mets? Again, they were given so many opportunities in the second half of the season to take care of their business. And honestly, I think one of the biggest issues with the Mets all season long, they played up to the level of their competition. We would see them play dynamic against the top teams in baseball this year. They won the season series from the Los Angeles Dodgers, but they couldn't take care of their business against the teams that they were supposed to take care of things. You look at the how they started the second half of this season. They lost 2 out of 3 at home against the Cincinnati Reds before they got on the streak where they won 7 games in a row. Then they had, multiple bulk losing streaks. I go back to mid-August. They were up 6-0 in a game at home against the Atlanta Braves before the wheels fell apart. Okay, you go back to the fact that right after late August. Okay, right after the Mets swept a 3-game set at home from the Phillies, got the gap down to 4 games in the East between them and Philadelphia, had all of the momentum going for themselves. And what did the Mets turn around and do? They proceeded to lose 3 out of 4 at home in their very following series with the Miami Marlins. Then, earlier this month, losing 2 out of 3 in Cincinnati. And who knew then how much that would come back and bite the Mets in the rear end. From there, the Mets went and got swept at Citizens Bank Park in a 4-game set against Philadelphia, which basically wrapped up the East for the Phillies. And again, you come back last weekend at home, all right? You knew you still controlled your own destiny. And what happened if you were the Mets? You lost 2 out of 3 to the Washington Nationals. You then turned around and took 2 out of 3 from the Cubs. You came into this weekend controlling your own destiny, and you could not get it done. There's no way in the world, with all of those things factored in, that Carlos Mendoza should get the opportunity to be the manager for the 2026 New York Mets. There's no way that you can do that. Okay? There's got to be changes to this team in the offseason. And like I said, they have to move on from Mendoza. They have to. Okay, I know that there's talks that he's going to be back. They have to. You have to wonder if Pete Alonso just played his last game for the Mets. He's going to opt out because he's still going to be looking for that long-term deal. Um, I if you're the Mets, you have to bring Pete Alonso back. He means so much to your team. But the Mets have a lot of questions in this lineup. The bottom line is guys that Steve Cohen paid did not deliver. Okay. And Steve Cohen has a lot of questions right now that need to be answered. It's one of those where, you know what? He wanted the fans to show up and show out for the team this year after he spent a lot of money last winter. Guess what? The fans held up their end of the bargain. The team did not. And again, it goes back to leadership. It's all of this. It's so much of, you know what, we'll get them next time. Okay, it's no big thing. Guess what? You had 79 of those we'll get them next time scenarios. And at the end of the day, that is why you were sitting back and watching the postseason, or going to be watching the postseason at home, like the rest of us. Edwin Diaz, his contract can be up. He can opt out and look for a new deal. The Mets definitely want to bring him back. Nonetheless, I do expect the Mets to be a slightly cheaper team next year. I don't see them, spending $340 million once again like they did this year. They're still going to have a high payroll, but this team needs to be more efficient, and they need to find guys who they hate to win, or hate to lose rather, more than they enjoy winning. This team has lacked chemistry all season long. Okay, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it with this Mets team. At the end of the day, they should be embarrassed. All right, I'll tell you like this, because when you spend the type of money that Steve Cohen did, when the expectations are there, like they were, you need to deliver. And you couldn't even get to the postseason. You couldn't even win 88 games to basically ensure that you can get to the postseason. And again, this is why I say Carlos Mendoza should not return next year as manager of the Mets. I'll tell you like this. You got all these owners around baseball, and there's a possibility of a work stoppage after next season. And a lot of team owners around baseball are pushing for a salary cap, and they're saying, the spending is out of control, and complaining about trying to compete with the big market clubs. Well, I got news for you. The big market club that just spent more than any other team ever in MLB history is going to be sitting at home watching the World Series. The franchise, the Milwaukee Brewers, who play in one of, if not the smallest markets in baseball, they've got home field advantage throughout. So for all of those people out there complaining about the luxury tax and the need for a salary cap, this, that, and third, spending the money does not guarantee a championship. The Dodgers usually have the highest payroll every single year. That doesn't mean they're going to win. Okay? So at the end of the day, if I'm a small market team, I'm sitting back and saying, you know what? Let Steve Cohen keep spending the money, because guess what? His team is not winning, and we're getting money from him via the luxury tax. So you know what? Keep on doing what you're doing. It's one of those things right there, where the Mets, and at this point, I'll call them the New York Mess, to say the least. They just find ways to continue being the Mets. It's one of those where they spent a lot of money on Juan Soto. He had a very slow start last year. He can't afford to have that 2 years in a row. I think, the last month of the season, Soto was swinging one of the better bats in baseball, but his slow start definitely derailed his team. Okay. It's one of those where I think Juan Soto needs to get off to a stronger start next season. I want to see how this lineup is going to look around him. And of course, it starts with Pete Alonso. Lindor is going to be there. All right. But who else is going to be on this squad? CJ, what's going on, my man? You're asking about the Braves and should they bring back Brian Snitker for one more year? I think the Braves are going to be okay. I think the Braves are going to get back to being the Braves, and I think the Braves are going to be healthy, and I think the Braves are going to be pushing once again for the NL East. Now, the team in the Mets that failed to take advantage of, all the Braves' injuries this year, that's going to be a different question. But nonetheless, it's going to be a lot of people pointing fingers. at this team. They want to know what went wrong. It's one of those where David Stearns, their president of baseball ops, is going to have his press conference tomorrow at Citi Field, and I guarantee you, all of the tabloid papers in the Big Apple and in the surrounding area, they're going to be lined up for that one. And I would imagine that those reporters are going to pepper Stearns because guess what? This is on him. This is a team that he put together. This is the manager that he brought in. This is the lineup that he constructed. And guess what? I think Stearns, who is a native New Yorker, had a lot of success running things for the Brewers, smaller market, but he better be prepared to be peppered at this press conference because the folks in New York can care less about your accomplishments elsewhere. They want to see results here. And for all of this, the way that this team is constructed, especially the pitching staff, he's going to have to answer for it. You know what I'm saying? No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Hands down, one of the biggest disappointments in baseball history. I think about the 92 Mets, the worst team that money can buy. Clearly, they didn't get to the postseason. You think about those 2007 and 2008 Mets teams that failed to get to the postseason. And this one's right up there with as far as frustration and disappointment for Mets fans. You would think after the way that last season ended, the Mets wanted to build off of that, and they got off to that solid start, all of that momentum to begin the season, and then right down the toilet. Okay, and like I said before, second half of the season, they were one of the worst teams in baseball, and that is why I truly feel Carlos Mendoza cannot come back as a manager for next season. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Bottom line is, the Mets were all hyped this year. That's all it was. And they failed to deliver. They have nobody to blame for this but themselves because with the talent that was on this team, it should never have even gotten to this point where going into the last game of the season where they could say, you know what, we needed the Reds to win and we had to beat the Marlins in order to be postseason bound. Okay, if the Reds had won 90 games or 95 games, I could totally buy that. But that was not the case. $340 million spent for an 83 win team. That's not a good look. I think there have to be wholesale changes coming to the Mets for next season. What will those changes be? We just got to sit back and see. But folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for checking out the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Before I go, CJ, you're saying you think Snicker should come back. It'd be a shame if this is how it ends for him. I think the Braves are going to bring him back. I truly do. That's just my thought process, man. But as always, if you like what you heard and saw, you know what to do. Just hit that like button as well as subscribing to this channel. And speaking of those subscriptions, which is 4 away, folks. 4 away from that magical number of 1,000. So definitely appreciate the support. And we've just got a little bit more to go to 4 digits. Also, if you are on the X, formerly known as Twitter, you can check me out at Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. And the same goes for Instagram, where you can check me out at 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge. Also, if you're on Facebook, definitely check us out at the Sports Depot 365. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. Tyler, CJ, definitely appreciate you chiming in. Definitely appreciate the support as always, guys. And until next time, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off, and I'm saying thanks once again for checking out the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.